I have never been to Estonia before, so this is my first time. Landed 2 days ago, and I am intent on trying blood sausage, kome, and as much Estonian food as I can. So if you have any recommendations, definitely let me know after this, and I will pursue it with vigor and eagerness over the next few days while I'm here. So for those who don't know me, I am head of immersive technologies at PwC, and so we write reports on emerging technologies like XR. We build XR applications and deploy them in the hundreds and thousands around the world. Also engaged with academia, so we contribute to academic studies on the value of XR technology. This is one of our volumetric capture applications that we built for internal use in the firm. I go around the world investigating use cases of XR, seeing them and how they run in person to understand them better and to log them and record information about them. I recently returned from a 2-year secondment to the United States, where I was based in Austin, Texas. Quite incredible, their stadium over there. Is bigger than this is a student stadium in Austin, Texas. It's bigger than the largest stadium, professional stadium we have in London. So the saying is true, everything is bigger in Texas. And finally, nothing to do with my PwC role and the subject of today's presentation. While I travel the world, I also like to investigate the history of this rich and exciting technology. This picture here is of me at the University of Minnesota's library in Minneapolis, and in the archives deep underground, they actually have boxes and boxes of historical XR documents, reports, analyst data, case studies, company pamphlets, all this sort of stuff. So I spent a day over there poring through that information. So in terms of the scope for today's presentation about the 1,000-year quest for VR, a few things I won't be talking about. Mind-altering drugs, as relevant as they may be to the world of virtual reality in some worlds. We'll keep that for another presentation, maybe next year's one in Vilnius. Philosophy, we'll keep that to a side. Nothing to do with theater. We'll maintain it all around the visual senses, as important as the auditory side is. And we'll talk about everything past the latter half of the 20th century. We won't go too much past that. So, starting with almost 1,000 years ago, there was an Arab mathematician called Ibn al-Haytham, and he built on the work of Chinese and Greek philosophers to study in a very formal fashion what could arguably be called the world's first projection technology. Using no electronics, nothing like that. It was referred to as camera obscura, which means dark room in Latin. Does anyone know about this phenomenon or has heard of camera obscura? Put your hand up if you have. About 30-40% maybe? So for those of you who don't know, the idea with this physical phenomenon is if you put yourself into a dark room and you create a little pinhole into the wall, you will get naturally a projection of the outside world onto the opposite wall, upside down, of course. And that is the basis, actually, for today's camera systems. Now, we've always been pursuing immersion, and we've achieved it in many different ways. These are the two, what I describe as the two main buckets. So one is surrounding yourself with these different worlds through different media, and the other one is by creating a sense of depth, so you feel a sense of 3D in that world. Now, talking about the tactic of surrounding a user, you can see examples of this that date back to the 18th century. So in 1793, an Irish painter called Robert Barker created these beautiful panoramic paintings that were so large in scale that they surrounded the user's sights. So this was an illustration at the time of the Rotunda in Leicester Square in London. And the idea was people paid a few shillings, they got entry into this exhibit, they climbed a bunch of stairs, they looked over the balustrade, and they had this beautiful, beautiful scenery of the Italian, Lake Como or whatever it was. And they immersed themselves in that world for largely for entertainment purposes. This building, by the way, is still survived 2 bombings in World War II, is still going in London, is now a church, if you want to check that out next time you're over there. And it maintains its panoramic fashion. So, talking about projection tech now and using panoramas to the next level, dome projection tech actually started as a World War II training project. And the idea was to build these dome-like structures and use them to help train anti-aircraft gunners. So Lieutenant Commander Henry Stevens of the Royal Navy in 1939 was commissioned to build the world's first dome trainer or anti-aircraft gunnery trainer. And the way this worked was pretty simple. You had an operator on a projection system that played a film of a plane flying. That was then projected onto the interior surface of the dome through a mirror, and then the trainee on the other side would look through the sights. They'd see the film of the plane overhead against the interior of the dome, and they would fire dummy weapons, and you could see the tracing results onto the dome, and a commander to the side would be able to provide some guidance on how they were doing and give them tactics and help on shooting forward ahead of the plane and tactics like that to become more adept at this skill. We talk about return on investment. How about this for a financial return on investment? This was published in the Evening Standard, and it was claimed that this dome projection technology, this early form of virtual reality technology, saved the military over £100 million in terms of training. So, pretty decent result, which you feel free to quote if you'd like in today's business cases. And as we know, this strategy of immersing users in these environments, these flat environments, technically, is still being used today through many different media, through mobile phones in a proxy sort of fashion, and through modern dome projection technology. So that's all about surrounding the user, but what about creating a sense of depth now? How does virtual reality work? And probably everyone in this room knows, but humor me for the sake of this presentation. What's the real core mechanic that makes virtual reality what it is? Any ideas? Shout out something. Someone will probably get it right. Binocular vision, exactly. Yep. The ancient phenomenon of stereoscopy. The idea that if you put your thumb in front of your face and alternate between 2 eyes, you can see 2 different images. Now, this concept, stereopsis, actually develops in humans at 3 to 5 months of age, as babies start to understand 3D depth cues from their binocular vision in the world. Now, in 1838, Sir Charles Wheatstone, a scientist, decides to present a new invention to the Royal Society based on this phenomenon. And he writes a paper about the stereoscope, entitled Contributions to the Physiology of Vision, Part the First, on some remarkable and hitherto unobserved phenomena of binocular vision. So the heftiest of titles possible, but the idea was it was all about stereoscopic vision and how useful it was for immersion. This was the first stereograph or stereoscopic viewing system, and the idea was you would put your face in the middle of this system, it would have 2 mirrors, and the mirrors would reflect information or paintings, pictures on the sides. So on the sides of this device here, into your eyes. So it was a bit of a rough device, but it was an early example of a stereoscope. Unfortunately, one of Sir Charles Wheatstone's colleagues didn't think too much of this device and referred to it as of little service and ill-fitted, not only for popular use, but for the application of the instrument to various useful purposes. This was a massive insult back in the day. It's just very longly drawn out, but to say that in public was pretty bad. Sir David Brewster invented something that starts to become familiar to us today, the Brewster stereoscope, a type of lenticular stereoscope. And the idea here was simple. You print a card, one image on each side. You shove the card into the back of this wooden box, which has two lenses on the front, and you're able to be immersed in a different world. Now, if we think about this device, which was released around 1849, it's portable. It's a wearable form of tech. You put it against your face. It uses lenses to focus the sight, and it applies the principle of stereoscopy to give you that sense of immersion, right? 2024. The Quest is a portable device. It's wearable tech. You wear it on your face. It uses lenses to focus your sight, and it applies the principles of stereoscopy to give you immersion. That is nearly 200 years later that we still use this technology today, which I find personally incredibly fascinating. And also the resemblance between these two devices is uncanny. The only difference between these two devices really is that one is made of wood, the other plastic, and then on one you give content on paper cards, and on the other you use electronic screens. The idea of stereoscopy was not only used as a viewer, though, it was also used to record imagery and video in the real world. And the idea here is very simple. You're using a camera, but you're recording from two different viewpoints. This was a stereoscopic camera in 1864 that used this principle. And a little known fact is that during the American Civil War, most photographs that you see in museums and around the place, they were one half of a stereoscopic pair, because most of the photographs of that time were stereoscopic photographs. They were immersive photographs. Now, if we think of this idea of using a different lens, at approximately the IPD of the average human, the difference with the pupillary distance, this concept is the same used by the Apple Vision Pro today, or the iPhone to record spatial video for the Apple Vision Pro. So again, we see similarities 200 years in the past relating to the technology that we're pursuing today. Now, there was a chap from Boston in the United States called Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and effectively, you could argue that he was responsible for proliferating the stereoscope throughout society. Part of the reason it became so famous and entered so many households during that time is because he chose deliberately not to patent that design and that device. He chose to effectively open source it. Now, what that meant is it kind of became a Google Cardboard of its time. It was just everywhere. It was in everyone's household. Everyone was copying it. Everyone was producing their own design. Everyone was pushing it out into the market. So in a way, this open sourcing pursuit of Oliver Wendell Holmes was caused the proliferation of the stereoscope, at least in the United States. Unfortunately, the stereoscopes did eventually die down. People got bored of being immersed in static imagery, and instead they chose to be immersed on larger screens that were more dynamic and more interactive, thus the birth of cinema. But a little known fact is that 3D film was actually invented by accident, by a French filmmaker and director, Georges Méliès, in an attempt to combat piracy. Now you might be wondering, where is the connection here? So what happened is George would create these films, and he would release them in France, and it would take a while to then bring them to the United States, because it was all physical back then. You didn't have the ability to send digital copies. Before he could do that, however, they were pirated and brought to the United States by bootleggers. So in an effort to combat that, he said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 videos at the same time of the film, what I'm filming. And I'm going to send one of these films directly to the United States to prevent any copies from the bootleggers, and I'm going to play the original one here in France. Now, it was never intended to be used as stereoscopic film, but what happens when you take 2 videos, one from here, and one from here. You accidentally have created a 3D film. So years later, people have discovered that actually these films are slightly different. They're from a slightly different angle. And so the 3D version has been reproduced as a result of that technique to combat piracy, which I thought was a very interesting fact. Now, I spoke to a few of you yesterday, so I decided to include these slides at the last minute. Stereoscopes were actually used in medical education too, and I know a few of you are involved in that industry, at least in education or in the medical field. And this is an example from the late 1950s. These are some pictures I took at the 3D space in Los Angeles that has a host of great historical information relating to and actual physical items relating to this tech. So this book here, A Stereoscopic Atlas of Human Anatomy, is a book, but it doesn't only contain text and pictures, it comes with reels as well. Did anyone own a ViewMaster growing up? A few people? A handful. So ViewMaster, for those who don't know, you put one of these reels in, you slide between the little pictures, and it's a way of presenting you with a stereoscopic view. So you had human anatomy on one page, descriptions in text, and then through the diagram you could link to the right immersive picture. So this was a way of creating a multimedia form of education using stereoscopic technology or early virtual reality technology. And in fact, the stereoscopes are so, they have a lot of fans in the world that there is an entire day dedicated to stereoscopy on June 21st. And the person that has proliferated this idea or started the world's first International Stereoscopy Day is a famous celebrity who you might know. Anyone have any ideas? Does this remind you of anything? I think this is the top of Buckingham Palace in London. Yes, exactly. Global rock star, astrophysicist, and director of the London Stereoscopic Company, Brian May. Who would have thought that he'd be so into stereoscopic technology / virtual reality technology? So there are many more stories to share around the world of this tech. We can talk about some of the early versions of the ViewMaster. This device here is one of the items in my historical collection that I have. It is a Model A ViewMaster, and the reason for this speckled design here is, I don't know if it was to do with a desire to create an interesting pattern, but do you know what those spots are? Asbestos. Yeah. So the idea is, you take this asbestos-riddled device, you put it right to your face, and then you keep it there for a few minutes while you're immersed in these worlds. Now, I joke slightly because it is completely safe. The asbestos is baked into the plastic, so there's no danger from it at all. But I thought it was quite interesting that they use such a hazardous and toxic material to create something that you put close to your face. They obviously didn't know at the time. Retrospectively, though, it's quite an amusing invention. There are stories from different continents. So in India, they've been using what's called the bioscope for many, many years now. And this is quite an interesting device. The operator is behind the machine, and they crank a wheel, which basically moves a running picture, which allows multiple users to stick their heads into all of these ports, which open up. And you can effectively get 3 or 4 users at a time being immersed in this movie or this running picture. Now, it's technically not stereoscopic, but it uses a lens and gives you a greater sense of immersion. So I personally would consider it in the history of virtual reality technology for the reason that it pursues a sense of immersion. In the University of Southern California, I'm sure do many of you know about the Sensorama? Put your hand up if you do. Oh, surprisingly less than I would have thought. So for those who don't know, the Sensorama is a very famous device in virtual reality history. It is an early attempt in the 1960s to create an immersive, multi-sensory, video-based immersive experience. So the idea was you'd stick your head in this device. It was invented by a chap called Morten Heilig. It would play a video, and you'd look through. Do I have a picture of it here? I don't have a picture, but effectively in that window there's two lenses, so similar to a virtual reality headset. You stick your head in there, you get an immersive stereoscopic view of the film being played, but it also releases scents at the right time. So it's a highly mechanical machine here, you can see, and they have these little scent bags here that as you're going through, cycling through a path of roses, rose-lined avenue, for example, the machine will push the rose scent with a fan into your face as you're watching this video. So quite a famous device in history. Morten Heilig attempted to sell it to Disney. Disney weren't interested. So it never worked out. It was never mass-produced. There's only 2 in the world. Both of them exist in the University of Southern California in Los Angeles at the moment. They're being restored. But unfortunately, as it is with most historical pursuits in the world, there's just not enough funding to repair and maintain these type of machines. So it's a very slow and arduous process that is being pursued on a voluntary basis currently right now. So a lot of stories throughout history. My main point in presenting this to you all today is, yes, there are a lot of stories and they're all very interesting and amusing and I'm sure intriguing in some senses to some of you. But really the point here is that no matter what continent you look at throughout human history, no matter what culture, over the last 1,000 years plus, humans have always pursued a sense of immersion. So what we're all doing today continues that beautiful legacy of building on all the technologies that have come before us to create greater and greater experiences and improve that sense of immersion with the latest technological advancements. So I'm personally very proud to be in this industry. I'm sure we all share a similar passion for the world of XR, and I'm so excited to see it happen here in the Baltic community. Thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it. I will end by mentioning one thing that is close to my heart and related to this presentation. If you know of anyone or hold any devices, photographs, pins, t-shirts, anything relating to pop culture, virtual reality, augmented reality in the past, and I'm talking about probably from the early 2000s and earlier, do get in contact with me. Let me know. I currently have almost a garage full of historical memorabilia relating to this technology in London, and it keeps growing. It's not a profit-making initiative. It's nothing to do with my employment. It's purely a passion project to try and preserve the technology. But hopefully one day it will be the world's first immersive museum or contribute to a similar pursuit. I do have here today, and you're welcome to check it out, and I'll share it with you later on, maybe at the break if you'd like to. I couldn't bring much of my collection here, but I do have various pictures from the collection. These are original press photographs that were used in newspapers mostly in the early to late 90s. You can see here, this is quite an interesting picture. It was of a virtual reality system in 1991 that was being shown in in Covent Garden in London. This was by a Leicester-based company called W Industries that made famous the virtuality group of headsets at the time. So a lot of those headsets are no longer functioning, but there is one museum in the UK, in Leicester, that still has 4 of these machines running and I've tried them out personally. It was one of the few times I felt sick in virtual reality, but it was a hell of an experience. They have actually, these were headsets that were invented in the early 90s. They had the ability to play multiplayer games in full 6DoF headset, 6DoF controller. So absolutely incredible technology for the time, running on Atari processors. So that was the reason I was sick, if anyone was wondering. Of course, other pictures of technologies through the ages, industrial use of technology. This is a official photograph from Volkswagen, has the Volkswagen watermark on the back of this photo. They're using it for asset vehicle visualization and design. I showed you that picture just now of Covent Garden. This is a lady in Autodesk. She was I think she's referred to by the newspaper as a cyber programmer. She was a virtual reality developer for Autodesk at the time. And I think she's here at a conference in Olympia, London in 1992, somewhere around there. You can see technology related to assisted reality, so similar to RealWear solutions and Vuzix solutions. They're being used for medical purposes, for remote assistance and to retrieve expert information. This is technically not really virtual reality, augmented reality, but I thought it was such a cool picture, I had to include it. He is a chap from one of the universities in the US, whose name escapes me now. He's actually based in Austin, Texas today, but this was at their early VR lab in the 90s. Engineers or train drivers on the Eurotunnel project using virtual reality for visualization purposes. And you can see this at the Science Museum. I believe that refers to the Science Museum in London, dated 1994. You've seen that picture, and then this is another story for another time, which we don't have time for today. But so my call is, please keep an eye out for any ability to save this technology, preserve the software, the hardware, the pop culture merchandise around it. Do get in touch with me. I'm happy to find a home for it and eventually, hopefully, allow it for public display in the world relating to this fascinating technology and its history. So that is my final thank you. Appreciate you listening.